I was 11 years old when this happened. Ariel, my older sister, was 14, and Belle, my younger sister, was 8. My dad, a freelance programmer, had just completed a major project, and to celebrate, we planned a movie night watching Final Destination. Dad loved scary movies and enjoyed scaring us. In the midst of the movie, the phone rang, leading Dad to pause and answer. He returned with Mom after a brief conversation, announcing that we would be spending the weekend in a cabin. Apparently, the client he worked for owned a cabin by a mountain lake and generously offered it to us for a reduced price. Excitement filled the air, and on Thursday, we embarked on a 2.5-hour drive to the mountains. Upon arriving, we explored the ranch-style cabin and discovered a small nook perfect for games. Mom and Dad got the large room, Ariel claimed a smaller one, and Belle and I settled into a room with a queen-sized bed. However, a locked closet puzzled us, and its contents remained a mystery. We went to bed around 11 o'clock. I slept near the lamp because Belle tended to kick in her sleep. I fell asleep quickly, but was abruptly awakened by Belle gripping my arm, trying to burrow under me. She was scared, squeaking in fright. When I sat up and looked towards her, I saw a pale, human-shaped figure moving away from the window. Instantly, I pulled Belle out of bed and rushed to our parents, who dismissed our fears. Returning to our room, Belle and I switched positions, and I told her a story to help her sleep. Morning came, and after exploring around the lake, we spent the day in a nearby town. Laughter filled the air as we approached the cabin, but Dad suddenly halted us, pushing the door open with ease. It wasn't latched, raising suspicion. Entering cautiously, Dad disappeared for a few minutes before rejoining us with a frown. He locked the door, and Ariel tried to distract us with a board game. Dad eventually announced bedtime at 9 o'clock, much to Ariel's dissatisfaction. As they argued, Belle and I went to bed, Belle by the window and me by the lamp. Later, Dad rushed into our room, scooped up Belle, and grabbed my hand. In the hallway, Ariel was being treated similarly by Mom. A high-pitched whine emanated from the living room, and our dog, Duchess, appeared anxious by the back door. Dad didn't release our hands as he rushed us to the van, and we drove home in silence. It took half an hour for Duchess to calm down. Dad explained to Ariel the next day, but Belle and I only learned the full story years later. Dad had heard moaning outside his window that night. Discovering the front door unlocked, kitchen items moved, and Duchess growling at the slightly open back door, he secured the house and evacuated us. Returning the next day to retrieve our belongings and finding multiple footprints outside Belle's and my window. I had been invited by my friend Kate to a party thrown by her friend Susan. Kate and Susan had gone to a Catholic school together during elementary and middle school, but they grew apart in high school. However, for Susan's birthday, her parents had rented a cabin for her, a tradition they had started the previous year. Kate and I drove to the isolated cabin, surrounded by woods, for the celebration. As we arrived, the darkness enveloped the surroundings, and we had to use our phones to navigate. Once inside, everything seemed fine, and the birthday girl appeared to be having a great time. However, there was an odd divide among the partygoers that Kate and I were unaware of. We joked about how the party in a cabin in the woods seemed like the beginning of a horror film, aware of the cliché. As the night progressed, a strange incident unfolded. A group of people at the party, including a guy with our city's name tattooed on his neck, was asked to leave. Rumors circulated that a ranger was on the way, and the group, fearing consequences, departed. However, the situation took an unexpected turn when one of the departing girls returned, loudly announcing her birthday wishes to Susan. Suddenly, windows were being broken, chaos erupted, and there were shouts of someone having a gun. Amidst the confusion, Kate and I remained in the cabin, unsure of how to process the unfolding events. Some people went outside to check if the group was still around. Eventually, most of the partygoers left, fearing the potential danger. 3 girls, initially planning to stay the night, hastily gathered their belongings to leave but immediately returned when they heard a scream from the woods. The scream turned out to be a newcomer expressing excitement, causing a mix of fear and relief. Kate and I stayed at the cabin for a couple more hours, reluctant to leave Susan alone. By 2 a.m., only a few people were left, and we decided to leave. Despite the frightening experience, the potential gangsters did not return. The group debated calling the police, but concerns about underage drinking and Susan's worry about her parents finding out led them to avoid involving law enforcement. The night, though scary, was dominated by the eerie setting of a cabin in the woods during a party hosted by Catholic schoolgirls. My friend Lily owns a cabin on a lake in Washington, and one summer she invited me and her cousin Evan to join her. It had been a delightful couple of days, and on the last night, just like the previous ones, we decided to go fishing at the lake, which was only a 5-minute walk from her cabin. It was around 7 p.m., and the fishing conditions were perfect at that hour. To reach the beach, however, we had to walk through a small section of woods, the trail in the middle, usually occupied by joggers and families during the day, led to another nearby beach. Our beach was more secluded, with no trail to get there. The descent was steep and slippery, requiring all 4s to climb back up. We stayed at the beach until around 8:30, just sitting in the dark and relaxing. Realizing it had gotten dark, I suggested to Lily and Evan that we should head home. They agreed, and we packed up our gear. It was the latest we had stayed out at the beach, and my overactive, scary movie-powered imagination started to make me a bit uneasy. Silently, we walked up the hill. I shared my unease about the place being creepy at night, and Evan decided to make it even worse by telling us a story about mountain men from the 60s. Supposedly, they lived in the woods and were part of some cult, responsible for murders in the area. While internally terrified, I urged Evan to stop trying to scare us, but his tale lingered in my mind. As we crossed the trail, Evan suddenly stopped and looked to our right, appearing scared. Lily dismissed him as being stupid, and we began climbing the steepest part of the hill on all 4s. Evan forcefully grabbed both of us by the arms, directing our attention to where he was looking. At first, I couldn't see anything, but as my eyes adjusted, I spotted a large figure, presumably a man, stumbling toward us. As kids, we panicked and scrambled up the hill as fast as we could. Glancing back, we saw the man running or stumbling quicker towards us. We finally got over the hill and sprinted across the road to Lily's cabin. Initially, it might sound innocent, but there was a deep feeling of dread seeing that man on the trail. I didn't believe he had good intentions. Upon reaching the cabin, we threw our gear on the porch and ran to the front door, which, of course, was locked. Lily's family had a secret knock, a fairly complicated rhythm indicating that the person at the door was a family member or friend. Lily and Evan banged on the door with the family knock. While waiting, I looked around, searching for the man who had followed us, but saw nothing. Once inside, in a state of panic, we told the adults the whole story. They dismissed it as probably just some guy whom we made feel bad. Despite our disagreement, we felt safe in the locked cabin with the grown-ups. The cabin had a walkout basement, not a creepy one, with a door and windows where Lily and I slept on bunk beds. After about 5 minutes of calming down, we heard the family knock. Initially thinking it was Evan trying to come in, I said, "Come in," but there was no response. It happened again, and we realized it was coming from outside, at the window. Lily and I turned white, staring at each other with that horrible feeling of terror in our stomachs. It happened again. more frantically this time. We ran to the stairway door and raced up to the living room, where Lily's family and Evan were. Tearfully, we recounted what we had heard, and Evan went downstairs to listen. He confirmed it was the knock. Lily's uncle, older brother, and older cousin gathered flashlights to investigate outside. The knocking continued, now at the front door, and Lily's uncle decided to call the police. He informed the police that someone was trying to get into his cabin, unsure of their intentions. The knocking persisted for another 2 minutes or so, and finally, it stopped. 5 minutes after the call, the police arrived, pounding loudly and yelling through the door. Lily's uncle looked out a window and saw other police officers searching around for the intruder. The police asked us kids what had happened in the woods, and we recounted the entire story. They never found anyone, but the unsettling knocking on the door will stay with me forever. The officer suggested it was probably just some twisted individual wanting to frighten kids. But what disturbed me the most was that the person had memorized the complicated family knock. All three of us ended up sleeping on the floor together that night. This is a true story, and every time I recount it, it captivates the attention of everyone in the room. So, in the summer of 2020, my friends Alex, Violet, and I made a decision to embark on a mountain vacation. Cabin fever had taken its toll on us, and we were desperate to break free after settling on a mountain estate. Our plan was to camp and hike at various locations for one night. We thought it would be adventurous to book a cabin in the woods. While Alex's parents had previously rented a fire tower and enjoyed the experience, all we could find was a cabin beside a fire tower. Despite this, it was a cheap, clean, and secluded option. Excited about the prospect of a night where we could be as obnoxious as we pleased, we booked it. In the weeks leading up to the trip, we hatched a plan to drop acid at the cabin. Violet had prepared by bringing an entire sheet of acid tucked away in their bag. As we pulled out of the driveway, a knot formed in the pit of my stomach, an aching feeling that wouldn't let go. I expressed my concerns to Alex and Violet, insisting that dropping acid that night was out of the question. Violet was displeased, and a heated argument ensued. However, I stood my ground, convinced that tripping that night was a bad idea. After the fireworks settled, we finally hit the road. The cabin was approximately 30 minutes away from the nearest town, perched atop a mountain. As we navigated the busted road, spiraling towards the summit, there were no pull-offs or other campsites, just a long, winding road leading to the cabin. Upon reaching the cabin, we settled in, started a fire, and as dusk gave way to night, we heard the unmistakable noise of an engine on the road. Headlights flashed, revealing a side-by-side vehicle carrying 3 kids. Our nerves settled as they smiled, waved, climbed the fire tower, and left. Although we had heard rumors of occasional visitors to the fire tower, they were the only ones we'd seen. We extinguished the fire and moved inside. Heating some hot dogs until they were lukewarm, we ate them quickly and sat in silence, realizing the profound quietude of the remote location. Every rustle of leaves and the whisper of the wind through the branches was audible. Accustomed to the white noise of the city, the silence was eerie. Jumping at every noise, too frightened to speak, I decided to break the tension. I cracked open a few wine coolers, passed them to Alex and Violet, and introduced a board game. Soon, we loosened up, laughter filling the cabin. It was the fun time we had envisioned, though more sober than initially planned. Later, we would recall hearing background noises, the snap of a twig or the distant rumble of an engine. Reluctant to disrupt the casual atmosphere, we ignored these sounds until a human hand slapped the window between us 3 times. Instantaneously, we all screamed. Alex dialed 911, put them on speakerphone, and handed his cell to me. Meanwhile, he grabbed poker from the fireplace, passing them around. Violet started calling family members, saying her last goodbyes. As we held our breath, listening for any more noise, a human hand reached up to the window and slapped it 3 times. We were all screaming in an instant. Alex called 911, put them on speakerphone, and handed his cell to me. He grabbed poker from the fireplace and passed them around, while Violet started calling family members, saying her last goodbyes. I held my breath and listened for any more noise. Whoever, or whatever it was, had heard us call 911 and was now making a silent retreat. Dispatch arrived about 20 minutes later, which was fortunate for a 1:00 a.m. emergency call. Their dogs combed the mountain, suggesting it might have been a bear. But their doubtful expressions revealed they didn't believe it. Barely managing to cook those hot dogs, we wondered why a bear would smack the window instead of going for the pan. Moreover, why would a bear knock on the window like a human? And why would it retreat stealthily after our screams? The police had no answers. Only an anecdote. They found a car at the base of the mountain, but no other signs of life. The revelation hit me hard. But Violet and Alex were too frazzled to fully comprehend it. Their car, dusted by our drive up the mountain, was covered in handprints. Handprints that didn't match ours and touched places we hadn't. Hastily, we gathered our belongings and threw them inside, eager to distance ourselves from that wretched cabin. We followed the police, grateful for every pothole that took us further from the ominous mountain. Sleep eluded me as thoughts of that car on the road echoed in my mind. There was nothing else on that mountain, no pull-offs, no other campsites, just the fire tower. Perhaps a visitor sought to spook us during a late-night excursion. But the kids from earlier had their headlights on. Whoever did this had stopped their vehicle further down the road and hiked the rest of the way to avoid being spotted. They sought silence and secrecy, and it was clear that this wasn't a cheap scare. They had planned it. I may never know what the person on the mountain intended for us, whether it was a practical joke or the beginning of a night terror. I'm grateful for Alex's quick thinking in calling 911. I wonder if our visitor knew we had service, as it surely was a welcome surprise for them. My family and I were camping enthusiasts. We'd frequent campsites, from the typical Yogi Bear Jellystone to Koa spots, but this time, we ventured into White Mountain National Forest for a more rustic experience, a change from our usual routine. I was around 15 at the time, navigating the rocky path of adolescence. On this trip, my younger brother Jeffrey and I decided to explore the area. We found a serene spot by a lake, but as dusk approached, we returned to the campsite, engaging in our usual camping rituals. That night, something felt off. I woke up groggily, only to discover Jeffrey missing. Panicked, I stepped out and found him heading towards the trail. Attempting to stop him, I inadvertently woke our parents. We located Jeffrey by the lake, but our peaceful moment was disrupted by an unsettling figure, a man, disheveled and wielding what seemed like a hammer. Instinctively, I rushed Jeffrey back to camp, diverting our path to avoid the man. His presence and demeanor set off alarms in my head. The chase ensued, with me practically dragging Jeffrey, his little legs struggling to keep up. Thankfully, we made it back, meeting our parents not far from the campsite. But our ordeal wasn't over. Our dad's truck, baited away by the mysterious man, was stolen, along with valuables from our tents. We used a walkie-talkie to alert authorities, leading to the arrest of the perpetrator a few days later. The man, who seemed unhinged and dangerous, had stolen the truck and was involved in a drunk driving incident, wrecking it. Reflecting on that night, I shudder to think what might have happened if we'd been deeper in the woods. The whole experience felt like a nightmare, a chilling reminder of the dangers lurking beyond the comfort of familiarity. When I was a teenager, a chilling incident occurred at my friend Alex's house. It was an average suburban neighborhood where I felt safe until that night. I wasn't keen on staying home alone, especially when my mom was away. So, I bunked at Alex's, just down the street. We were hanging out with his parents and their guests, having a blast outside until we were ushered in around 11 p.m. to get ready for bed. The night took a terrifying turn when, amid sleep in the basement, I awoke to strange noises. Initially, I dismissed it, assuming it was one of Alex's cousins. But then came the pounding, ominous and unsettling. I hesitated, attributing it to adults or someone from downstairs. The atmosphere grew eerie as the party outside quieted. Fear gripped me, reminiscent of childhood's irrational fears of monsters lurking. Trying to return to sleep proved futile when suddenly, a man loomed over me, attempting to grab and abduct me. In a frantic struggle, the others intervened, but the assailant managed to seize me. It was Alex's dad who heroically intervened, using a fire extinguisher to incapacitate the attacker. Despite our efforts, the masked man escaped. I couldn't shake off the nightmares or the paranoia afterward. It haunted me, leaving me sleepless and wary, reflecting on what transpired. It's clear how crucial listening to intuition is. Perhaps, had I trusted my gut, the outcome might have been different. This harrowing experience ingrained in me the importance of heeding instincts, ensuring safety over sorry situations. The intruder likely entered through the sliding glass door, lurking in the shadows, planning his nefarious act. Although the concussion healed, the emotional scars persisted, teaching me to trust instincts and never disregard them for a peaceful night's sleep. I'm grateful for Alex's vigilant parents that night, but it's a stark reminder that safety trumps all. That incident shaped my approach to life, urging others always to prioritize safety and intuition. It's a hard lesson learned, but a crucial one for navigating life's uncertainties. It all started on a rainy night. My dad wanted me to babysit my little brothers while he headed to the bar for some pool and drinks. Once I got the kids settled, I decided to order some food and enjoy a bit of gaming on CS:GO while waiting. After nearly 40 minutes, there was a knock at the door. A rough-looking man claimed he had my food. I tipped him, and off he went. I returned to my computer, forgetting to lock the door. Thankfully, a friend's reminder to secure it turned out to be crucial. I double-checked and, sure enough, the door was unlocked. After fixing that, I resumed my gaming. My setup was in the living room, facing a kitchen with a large bay window directly behind me. While munching on my food, I heard the front doorknob jiggling. I brushed it off until my dog started barking. Panic struck as the door began rattling with aggressive banging. Terrified, I hid under the counter, dialing my dad and then 911. Meanwhile, my little brothers, screaming, claimed someone stood outside their bedroom window, urging them to unlock it. I ushered them to my room, instructing them to stay hidden. I feared the intruder might target the back door, a glass one vulnerable to being rocked or shattered, armed with a knife. I anxiously awaited the arrival of the police and my dad, dreading a potentially life-threatening showdown. When the cops finally arrived, the trespasser had vanished. Every night following that incident, I lived in fear of his return, imagining a face-to-face encounter, unsure if it was a random stranger or the earlier Chinese food delivery driver. I hoped he'd stay away, and thankfully, he did. But the fear lingered, especially during lonely nights. It was unsettling, realizing how vulnerable we were as kids. Perhaps the intruder sensed that vulnerability, but thankfully, he gave up. I'll never know the real reason he fled. Perhaps he heard the police call, but the uncertainty left a lasting impact. As a young child, my family and I resided in a tiny town, a place I despised during my early years. Despite my initial disdain, as I grew older, I discovered a newfound affection for it. Yet, it was a town with challenges. Situated a distant 15 minutes away from any store, and our family, though close-knit, struggled financially. Socializing was restricted, and I received homeschooling, save for the company of my younger brother. Otherwise, the isolation might have been maddening. My upbringing was about 95% seclusion from the outside world. My father toiled for nearly 15 hours daily, while my mother, a stay-at-home mom, cared for us. Picture a house in rural Mississippi, surrounded by acres of cornfields, neighbors just a 2-minute drive away. This setting felt normal growing up. But as I ventured into city life, I realized how sheltered I was. Despite this, nights in the countryside were eerily dark, devoid of street lights. One night, I ventured out while everyone slept, not for mischief, but sneaking out nonetheless, a breach of my curfew. Sometimes, I carried a lantern, reading under a tree or swinging on the hammock. Other times, I simply sat on the porch when boredom struck. I suppose I was an odd kid. On one such night, I heard voices, distinct from my family's. Curiously, I investigated. There was an odd calmness, perhaps naive innocence that shielded me from fear. I followed the sound. An angry man's voice, possibly on the phone. But why was he in our vicinity? Peeking from behind a tree, I saw his shadowy figure moving with the wind, heading my way. That's when fear struck. A realization of potential danger. I sprinted back home, but he pursued, banging on our door, threatening to get me. Swiftly, my father armed himself, warning the intruder without unlocking the door. The man paused, then fled as soon as he heard my father's voice. We didn't involve the police, assuming the threat had dissipated, though I often envisioned his return, envisaging darker outcomes. Thankfully, he never reappeared. In my thoughts, I believe my father would have defended us fiercely if needed. That's the tale of my encounter with the man who attempted to abduct me and invade our home. It was a typical Friday after school, the kind where I relished in the freedom of having the house to myself, with my parents at work until later in the evening and my older brother off doing who knows what. I reveled in the chance to unwind. As soon as I stepped off the bus, I dove straight into my comfort zone, shedding the strict school attire for cozy sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt that I'd never wear in public. There was something magical about that transition from school to home, a feeling of relief and relaxation. Following my usual routine of a quick shower, some snacks, and eager anticipation for my friends to hop online for gaming, I learned my parents would be out at a party a few hours away. The prospect of having the house all to myself thrilled me, even though they reminded me to be cautious and contact our trusted neighbors in case of an emergency. Hours slipped by, and exhaustion crept in unexpectedly, foiling my plans for an all-night gaming spree. As I lay in bed, engrossed in social media and videos, a sudden noise outside startled me. Peering cautiously through the blinds, I spotted a car unfamiliar to me pulling into our driveway, only to swiftly reverse and speed off down the street towards the wooded trail at the end. Though it could have been innocuous, my instincts told me otherwise. Minutes turned into forgetfulness until a jarring yell shattered the silence. Someone had broken into our home. Panic surged through me as I realized I had to act fast. With no means to defend myself, I hastily barricaded the door and contemplated hiding under the bed, my last resort. The intruder's aggressive attempts to enter my room intensified my fear. In a desperate move, I managed to call the police, and thankfully, an officer arrived swiftly. The intruder, still in my doorway, lunged at the officer, resulting in a confrontation that left the intruder injured from a gunshot. After recounting the traumatic events to the police, and with the intruder in custody, I contacted my parents, who rushed home. Now, that man awaits trial while I grapple with the terror of that night, making me dread being home alone. It's an experience that's etched into my memory, making solo nights a source of fear rather than freedom. Years ago, my parents had the garage converted into a spacious bedroom/hangout area where gaming sessions and parties were a regular thing. I was around 10 years old. One of the few times I found myself alone in the house while my siblings were off elsewhere. I spent the night engrossed in our PS2, relishing the freedom. The converted space boasted a wall window and a typical front door complete with bolt and doorknob locks. Engrossed in my game, it took me a while to realize the tapping on the window wasn't part of the gameplay. A rhythmic drumming of fingers in a distinctive pattern, 1 to 3 4, repeated rapidly, continued for what felt like an eternity. Maybe around 5 unsettling minutes, the eerie drumming finally ceased. When a knock rattled the doorknob, panic surged as I stealthily checked the locks, discovering to my horror that they were unlocked, though the door often seemed stuck unless forcefully secured. Locking them loudly, I hoped to deter the unwelcome visitor, but his response was chilling. An older man's sigh followed by a disturbing laugh, escalating into aggressive banging on the door. Fear immobilized me as he moved to peer through a covered window, his shadow looming ominously. Frozen in terror, I stood motionless until he pleaded, "Let me in. Love, I'm cold and hungry. Don't you want to be nice to your neighbor?" I acted impulsively, plunging into darkness, hiding in my closet until my parents returned from their anniversary date. Oblivious to the harrowing ordeal, I'd endured out of fear of getting in trouble for being up past bedtime. Last year, I was renting a house in a small, economically struggling old mining town nestled in Virginia. Living alone, I experienced an unsettling incident during one of the first warm nights of spring that left me on edge. Around 4 a.m., I awoke abruptly in my living room recliner to the eerie sound of my doorknob turning persistently. Initially thinking it was a mistaken address, I shouted a quick, "Hey, wrong place." But the situation escalated when the door started shaking violently, and a hand began pounding on it. Fearing for my safety, I hastily grabbed a knife from the kitchen and dialed the police, staying put until help arrived. By the time the officers arrived, the person had vanished, leaving no trace. Despite their thorough search, the police found no one. I tried to carry on with my day, but anxiety lingered, making it impossible to return to sleep. After work, arriving home, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone might have broken in, despite finding no evidence. As the evening wore on, around 9:30 or 10 p.m., I lay on the couch engrossed in a book when a sudden, peculiar noise jolted me. It seemed internal, but I couldn't discern its origin. Shortly after, muffled voices reached my ears, their words indistinguishable. The unnerving realization hit me someone was there. Panic set in as I frantically scanned the area, only for the sound to abruptly cease. Then, an ear-splitting scream shattered the silence, an otherworldly, demonic howl that jolted me into action. Realizing the crawl space as a potential hiding spot, I debated calling the police, but opted to investigate myself, not wanting to risk seeming paranoid. Venturing outside and circling the house, I aimed to access the crawl space exteriorly, an area I'd never explored before. To my shock, I discovered a man seemingly asleep or possibly under the influence of heavy drugs. Keeping my composure, I immediately notified the authorities and stepped away, waiting for their arrival. When the police arrived, they extracted the man, sending him to the hospital and then to jail. To my horror, I learned he'd been practically living beneath my house, equipped with a sleeping bag, a lantern, and stored food. The revelation left me shaken. I couldn't fathom how I hadn't noticed his presence all that time, and the experience haunted my sleep for weeks to come. It was the height of summer, and my folks had taken off for the weekend to our place in Cape Cod, a 2-hour drive away. Them leaving me alone for a few days was no biggie. Mom had left me some pulled pork and pasta to heat up whenever, and I had some cash if I fancied ordering a pizza. Everything was chill, and on the first night alone, I stayed up gaming on Xbox until 3 o'clock in the morning. So, naturally, I woke up pretty late the next day. I checked my phone and realized it was already past 1 p.m. I'd made plans to play street hockey with my buddies around 3. So I hurriedly got out of bed and stumbled into the shower. I tend to take really long showers when my folks are away. So I was lost in there for about 45 minutes, scrolling through Reddit and Twitter. Suddenly, I heard one of the doors creak open. The bathroom sits right above the back door, and that thing's loud when it moves. Just like the front door. I froze instantly. I was supposed to be alone. I waited for a couple of minutes, trying to catch any other sound. Maybe it was just the wind, or perhaps my parents had come back early. So, I turned off the shower, wrapped a towel around me, and cautiously tiptoed down the stairs to check it out. Despite my house being ancient, every step on those stairs makes a racket. It took me around 45 seconds to descend those 12 stairs, trying to be as silent as possible. As I reached the second to last step, right before I could peer into the kitchen, I took a breath to gather myself. I knew I was probably being irrational. There couldn't possibly be anything there. There was no way I wouldn't have heard another noise. And there was no reason for them to still be in the kitchen, even if it were burglars or something. After mentally berating myself for being paranoid, I chuckled quietly and casually strolled the last couple of steps, turning the corner into the kitchen, and there, about a feet away from me, stood a man. He was dead still, staring straight at me, with this enormous grin plastered across his face. But what shook me the most wasn't his face or that creepy smile. It was his arms. They weren't just at his sides. They were positioned in the most bizarre, unnatural way. It's hard to describe, but they were almost twisted, as if they were rotated to the point of being almost completely reversed, and lifted up a bit behind him. Honestly, I think I almost had a heart attack right there. Looking back, I can see how eerie that situation was, but at that moment, I just reacted. I took a step toward him and swung at him, as hard as I could, half slapping and pushing him towards the ground. The moment I made contact, I sprinted back up the stairs, leaving my towel in the kitchen. My heart was pounding like crazy as I barricaded myself in my room, locking the door and propping a chair against the knob. I dialed 911 in a panic, nearly in tears. Recounting what had just happened, I huddled on the floor, staring at the door, praying for the cops to arrive soon. The light seeping in from the gap beneath the door suddenly vanished. The guy was standing right outside. I couldn't move or make a sound, even though the 911 operator was repeatedly trying to get my attention. I was frozen, watching the shadow under the door shift in eerie ways. For what felt like an eternity, I stayed curled up, praying silently for the man to leave. Finally, the light returned, and I heard faint footsteps gradually receding down the hallway. Minutes passed in absolute silence as I sat there, unable to utter a word. Then came the banging on the front door, and the sound of 2 officers entering my house. I felt a wave of relief and opened the door to find them there. I was on the verge of tears. Nowadays, my parents never leave me alone at home, thank God. I check and double-check every lock before bedtime. I still get occasional nightmares, and my heart races whenever I see someone standing still, but I'm coping all right, even with the police sketches and lineups. They never found the person who invaded my house, and every time I glance outside, I half expect to see him standing across the street, grinning under a lamppost. I have no clue what he wanted or who he was, but it's a chilling memory that lingers. Regardless of the passing time, the memory of that chilling encounter lingered. It left an indelible mark, a haunting reminder that safety can swiftly dissipate, despite all precautions. The unknown man's visitation remained an unsolved enigma. I learned to cope, but the fear persisted in the recesses of my mind. The nights became quieter, yet shadows held secrets, and every still figure triggered a rush of panic. The sense of vulnerability lingered, reminding me that security is fragile, and trust, a luxury. The incident altered me, instilling an acute awareness of the world's unpredictability. I became more vigilant, cautious of my surroundings. The safety of being alone at home dissipated, replaced by an unshakable unease. Life moved forward, but the experience etched a cautionary tale, a narrative warning of the thin line between security and intrusion. The perpetrator remained a phantom, haunting the corners of my thoughts, a constant reminder of the night when a smile met with twisted arms, leaving a lasting imprint on my soul. This happened years back when I was living with my ex. We'd only been in that house for about a month when this incident unfolded. He was out with his colleagues for work, leaving me alone at home. The evening passed by with TV and takeout, but strange noises intermittently disrupted the peace. Each time I tried to focus on them, they'd fade away, leaving me on edge. As the night wore on, I decided to head upstairs, using the computer for a bit before calling it a night. We didn't have a phone line installed yet, and my prepaid phone had run out of credit. I was essentially isolated with no means to reach out. While alone in the house, in the dimly lit bedroom, typing away on my laptop, the eerie noises returned. Barely audible rattles and faint screeches. I shut off the music, straining to discern their origin. Venturing cautiously, without turning on any lights, I retrieved a heavy iron rod from our wardrobe. An unsettling feeling of someone possibly lurking made me hesitant to illuminate the house. With no means of calling for help, I was growing increasingly anxious. I crept into the bathroom, aiming to peek into the alley behind the house, where the whispers seemed to originate. There, hidden in the darkness, I heard murmurs indicating that the men had noticed our valuables and were aware I was home alone, plotting a potential break-in. Perched at the bathroom window, I witnessed them attempting to force open our gate. Their size and the intensity of their efforts daunting. As a petite woman, fear gripped me as I clung to the iron rod, desperately trying to plan my escape. Suddenly, a floodlight from the neighboring house illuminated the alley, startling the intruders. Barking and shouting ensued, and they hastily retreated, leaving me shaking with terror. I remained locked in that room until my ex returned in the early hours, having been oblivious to the night's turmoil. It was a sleepless night, and in the morning, I found our gate nearly broken, scratches around the keyhole, a chilling reminder of how close danger had come. If not for the intervention from the neighboring house, I shuddered to think about the potential outcome. That night became a pivotal moment, a stark reminder of vulnerability and the thin line between safety and danger. The experience left an indelible mark, altering my sense of security and trust in the familiar. We reinforced the gate, installed extra security measures. Yet the fear lingered. Sleep became restless, and every creak in the night amplified my unease. The sanctuary of home felt tenuous, a place where shadows held secrets and noises echoed with ominous potential. Despite the passage of time, the memory persisted, a cautionary tale etched in my mind. It taught me vigilance and resilience, but it also left a lingering sense of fragility, a haunting reminder that safety can vanish in an instant. Life moved forward, but the echoes of that night persisted, a stark narrative of what might have been, the solidarity of the neighborhood. The unexpected floodlight became a beacon of hope amid the chilling darkness, a reminder of how community and vigilance can thwart impending danger. Though the perpetrators remained unknown, their shadowy presence forever altered my perception, and as I moved on, that night's events became a stark reminder of vigilance, a narrative etched in my memory, urging caution and preparedness in a world where safety is not always guaranteed. Years ago, I found myself alone at home, an 11-year-old tasked with looking after my 7-year-old brother. It was late, around 9 p.m. The night draped in darkness and pouring rain. We were engrossed in reading in our room adjacent to the front door, its big window adorned with open blinds. The tranquility shattered when the doorbell rang, followed by insistent knocking. I assumed it was my parents, but found it odd they hadn't used their usual entryways. Peering outside, I saw only rain. Their car wasn't in sight. Confused, I approached the door. But the man's voice on the other side was not my father's. He claimed to be selling Girl Scout cookies, a baffling proposition given the weather and hour. Silent, I cautiously checked the peephole and side window, anticipating a father-daughter duo. Instead, my heart plummeted as I beheld a grown man, perhaps in his late 50s, without a box of cookies, drenched on our doorstep. The realization that the locks were all that stood between us, and a potential threat rattled me. He persistently knocked, mentioning his cookies, as I contemplated calling the police. Then, a chilling sight, the man peering into our room where my brother was, engrossed in his book. Panic surged within me. Summoning all courage, I darted to turn off the lights, swiftly closing the blinds in plain view of the man. Racing through the house, I secured every lock and drew all the blinds, urging my brother to hide in a windowless closet without revealing the situation. I shielded him from fear. Strangely, I never called for help or informed our parents. Instead, I waited, petrified, until the man eventually departed. Reflecting on that night sends shivers down my spine. The realization that numerous things could have gone awry haunts me. My deepest fear remains a stranger gaining access through an unlocked door, an unthinkable scenario that thankfully didn't materialize that night. That night, fraught with uncertainty and fear, left an indelible imprint on my consciousness. It became a stark reminder of vulnerability and the potential dangers lurking beyond our doorstep. In the aftermath, I fortified our home, checking and rechecking locks, reinforcing security measures, and ensuring constant vigilance. The lingering unease persisted, casting shadows of doubt on what had once felt like a secure sanctuary. The memory of that stranger's unwelcome presence haunted my thoughts, a chilling reminder of how swiftly safety can be compromised. It stirred a deep-seated fear of the unknown, a relentless worry that persisted long after that night had passed. Yet, despite the lingering unease, life continued. We resumed our routines, but the heightened sense of caution remained, a silent sentinel against potential threats. Looking back, I realized the gravity of that situation and the potential risks we faced. It's a testament to luck and perhaps a touch of instinct that things didn't escalate further. That night, the fear of an unlocked door being breached by a stranger became a stark reality. It was a close call, a chilling reminder of the need for constant vigilance and the importance of swift action when faced with potential danger. Those incidents with unexpected visitors left me deeply wary of strangers at my doorstep. Yet, one evening, November 2018, proved to be the most distressing. It was England, 6 p.m., but the darkness had already enveloped the surroundings. I was in my room, engrossed in YouTube, when my mom left to pick up my brother and stopped by the gas station, alone at 17. It wasn't unfamiliar, but this night took an ominous turn. Noises echoed from downstairs, initially dismissed as my cat, but realization struck he was beside me. The banging on the back door and the jangling of keys followed, initially assumed to be my brother, but the banging continued, escalating my anxiety. Braving the fear, I ventured into the kitchen, only to witness chaos. The cat flap ripped off, shards scattered. Panic surged as I called my mom, hoping it was my brother playing a prank, but his voice confirmed he wasn't home. The dread intensified. I called the police, trying to stay composed while hiding in my locked room. Terrifyingly, the noises resumed downstairs. Tears flowed as I relayed the situation to the dispatcher. Relief flooded in as my mom, brother, and the police arrived simultaneously. The intruders had attempted a break-in. Using a broom to reach the keys and nearly gaining access, they'd been watching, waiting for the opportune moment when they saw my mom's car leave. They hadn't known I was home alone, but upon noticing me, they retreated and, chillingly, decided to return. The damage they caused bore testament to their persistence, but sheer luck prevented their entry. They hadn't anticipated the broken door handle. Their plan foiled as they aimed to infiltrate while I remained oblivious, locked in my room. That night reinforced the need for vigilance, and heightened my wariness of strangers lurking around the house. The chilling realization that they might have succeeded had circumstances been slightly different left an indelible mark. It was a stark reminder that safety is fragile, and that a moment's oversight can invite danger. That night was a chilling reminder of the fragility of safety, prompting us to fortify our home even more rigorously. It lingered in our minds, a haunting echo of what could have been. In the aftermath, security measures were heightened, and precautions became second nature. The fear of potential intrusions persisted, casting a shadow over the once familiar comfort of home. The incident left an indelible mark on my psyche, a constant reminder to remain vigilant. It taught me the gravity of those eerie sounds and the importance of taking swift action in the face of potential danger. As days passed, life regained its semblance of normalcy, but the memory remained vivid, a cautionary tale passed on to friends and family. It underlined the necessity of staying alert and cautious, especially in vulnerable situations. Though the intruders had failed in their attempt, their unsettling presence had left an enduring impact. The incident became a pivotal moment, reshaping our understanding of safety and the measures needed to protect it. This incident occurred over a decade ago, and I'll do my best to recount it accurately. One of our childhood homes had a balcony connecting both my mother's and my own bedrooms, through large glass doors. Next to the balcony stood the trees, one of which I used to climb up and down. It faced the street, illuminated by a nearby street lamp. I was 13 at the time. One night, with my brother and mother away, I was reading in bed under a faint light. I heard rustling in one of the trees outside, a common occurrence due to possums and bats. Thin curtains covered the glass doors, and despite the dimness, I could usually see the street lamps glow through them. However, that night, I witnessed a shadow creeping past the doors. It was a tall figure, not one of the neighborhood kids or my petite mother. They moved slowly, trying to remain unnoticed. The streetlights created a dark silhouette against the doors. As they moved out of sight, I found myself frozen in fear, unable to move or think. Suddenly, I heard the sound of someone attempting to open the glass doors leading to my mother's balcony. Unsure if they were locked, I swiftly and silently rushed to my bedroom door, securing it. The intruder continued to jiggle the door handle, but it seemed locked, granting me a moment of relief. However, the relief was short-lived as the person paced along the balcony towards my set of glass doors. Their shadow halted directly in front of them. I was petrified, realizing that they couldn't see me, but I could see them. A hand reached for the door handle, and my heart raced. Had I indeed locked those doors earlier? What if I forgot? The seconds leading up to that moment felt like an eternity. Thankfully, the door remained locked. The intruder then paced back and forth on the balcony. Without a mobile phone and the landline distant, I was too terrified to look away or call for help. Tears streamed down my face silently as I hoped and prayed for them to leave. Amidst my silent panic, the intruder uttered, "I could just break the glass. You know, It was then that car headlights turned onto our street, prompting the intruder to vanish from sight, a loud thud signaling their departure. When my mom returned, I was hysterical, barely able to articulate what had occurred. She promptly called the police, but they never found the intruder. However, a neighbor reported a suspicious truck matching the description of a vehicle connected to attempted child abductions nearby. The police suspected the individual might have followed me home, sparking a chilling realization of how close danger had come. That night left an indelible mark on my sense of safety and security. Despite the passage of years, the memory remained vivid, a haunting reminder of vulnerability and the fragility of our surroundings. We fortified our home with additional security measures, yet the unease lingered. Sleep became elusive, shadows morphed into potential threats, and every rustle outside evoked a sense of foreboding. The incident reshaped our routines and precautions. It became a tale shared with neighbors and friends, a cautionary narrative about vigilance and the importance of staying alert to potential dangers lurking nearby. Though the intruder remained unidentified and uncaptured, the neighborhood's vigilance heightened. Small gestures of solidarity emerged, fostering a tighter-knit community focused on safeguarding one another. For me, that night became a pivotal moment, a reminder of the importance of vigilance and swift action in the face of danger. It instilled in me a lasting awareness of the need to stay cautious, especially in seemingly safe spaces. Life moved forward, but the events of that night remained etched in memory. It became a narrative of resilience, a stark reminder of how close danger could encroach, urging a constant state of vigilance and preparedness.